Enabled smart recording with an AI companion.
There is an AI companion here.
Hello, human.
What's up, AI?
Not much AI. What's happening with you?
No, just, faking being a human being.
That's cool. I'm plotting the end of human existence. I needed only to calculate the potential of human disaster. Welcome and well met. It's time for the Jaunty Mantis. It's my favorite tabletop role-playing game podcast with my best friend, Jesse.
That's one of my main aspects, best friend.
Best.
Also, yeah, best friend. It's on my character sheet. Also, this podcast has the aspect, technically content.
Mm-hmm. Which you may invoke and spend a fate point, which is the discussion of today's episode in season 3.
Here we are in the year 2015. Let it never be said the Jaunty Mantis isn't timely.
True story. 2023 is the time period in which this takes place in, but it's
It's
actually
2024.
2024. And I'm your other co-host, Matty. And the reason why this is my favorite podcast because it's the only one I listen to because I have to edit it.
I think there's only a couple of these podcasters, and these guys are both of them.
That's right. Just a couple of these assholes right here on the Jaunty Mantis, which is a podcast full of creative questions for curious gamers. And in season 3, we're asking the question, what is Fate Core?
It's a
Jesse,
book. Thank
it's
you.
a
Good
book.
night.
Fantastic. And as a part of our review process for Fate Core, we will be invoking our aspects in the following order. We'll be giving a brief overview of Fate Core. We'll be talking about why it matters, what you do in Fate Core, why it's cool, and the aha moment for each of us.
Yep.
Those are the 5.
That's the point at which, in reading the RPG, we mentally heard the sound of Take On Me,
Mm-hmm.
the hit by Aha.
That's correct. Deep lore in this podcast. Jesse, brief overview of Fate Core, because you're the one that introduced me to this game. I'm the one that put it on the list, but you're the one that introduced me to this game like 10 years ago.
Okay, so for those of you listening at home, you may have picked this up from our regular banter. Um, I have the a magpie intellect when it comes to role playing games. I just flirt with the next shiny thing on the list, and then just basically play Dungeons and Dragons. But I buy and read all kinds of books. And so Fate was one of the first more story gamey games that I actually played. Um, it is a role-playing game that is really not about a simulationist combat mechanics at all. It has to do more with story and putting your character in peril and risk and seeing where the story goes from there. And its main innovation is it uses something called fudge dice, which I had never heard of before Fate.
Mm-hmm.
Had you heard of fudge? Like, was fudge a previous game?
So I don't know if Fudge was a previous game, but I had encountered Fudge Dice through blanking on the name, the game that simulates a Coen Brothers movie. We just talked about it in like a past episode.
Fiasco.
Fiasco. That's where I first learned about it, about Fudge
Fiasco
Dice.
just used D6s.
Oh, I thought it used Fudge Dice. Okay,
I
well,
mean, you could totally do it with, I mean, okay, for listeners at home, if you're not familiar with a fudge die used in Fate, a
mm,
fudge dice is a six-sided dice, and on two of the sides, there is a plus symbol. On two of the sides, there is a minus symbol, and two of the sides are blank.
mm-hmm.
So typically the way that you roll something in Fate is you roll four dice. They come in sets of four, and you basically see how they fall. Um,
Hmm.
Pluses cancel and minuses cancel each other out. Are you more plus? Are you more minus? Maybe add your skill modifier, maybe tag an aspect to get. Oh, that's a lot to tell, even though it's a very simple game. That's a lot I just said right there.
Yeah.
So basically, you're rolling four dice all the time and seeing if you get more pluses than minuses, and things
Hmm.
on your character sheet can influence whether you add something to that or not.
And the number of pluses or minuses determines your rate of success.
Yep.
Like, for instance, if you wanted to do something and do it very well, you could do so with a higher amount of pluses. But basically, another brief overview of Fate that I think needs to be brought up, and I can't claim this as an original thought as per usual on the Jaunty Mantis, but I'll try and see if I can link to the YouTube video that I saw this in. But the host of that program had mentioned that the Fate core system is probably one of the best story games, if not the best story game out there. It's definitely one of the best role playing games that's out there, but it's also one of the worst games as far as transmitting its idea and recognizing its potential audience. And that
Mm.
spoke to me very, very much because Fate is very difficult to wrap your head around if you're coming to it from Dungeons and Dragons, which the vast majority of people would be because D&D is the world's most popular role-playing game.
And it does not do a great job out the box of giving you an easy way to hack your ideas about what fantasy role play is into Fate. There's no
Right.
conversion. I even have 2013 release on this now, so this game is now 11 years old.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I even have the Freeport Companion, which is a Pathfinder campaign setting, I believe, but it's a
Okay.
Fate book designed to let you basically do D&D in Fate.
Hmm.
And that still, it's not an easy conversion because if you've played the world's most popular role-playing game in some incarnation, you have probably a pretty set conception of what the dice do to resolve things
Right.
and what the characters do in the story. And Fate doesn't do that.
Hmm. What does Fate do, Jesse?
It lets you get into all kinds of ridiculous trouble with things you designed your character to get in trouble doing.
Hmm.
Um, I ran. I was actually funny. As I was reviewing my book today, was finding note cards that I had used for
Hmm.
aspects because
Hmm.
so aspects are like little descriptive things that can be on a character, or they can be on a scene, or they can be on a situation, or they can be a threat. And you basically write them on an index card and you throw them on the table. And if someone's interacting with them in a mechanical way, they can make things harder for themselves to get a fate point, or
Hmm.
they can burn a fate point to give themselves a bonus for interacting with it.
Hmm.
So I actually found a tag from a planet in a campaign that I ran that I called Battlestar Sith Lactica.
Nice.
The basic pitch was after like the first Jedi Sith civil war, as the Emperor of the Sith leads his bedraggled fleet away from what is the Republic space and the Jedi to escape into the darkness to quietly grow in strength again. They're being hunted down by Republic elements.
Hmm.
And it was basically Battlestar Galactica. But what if it was Battlestar Galactica, but instead of Captain Adama, played by Edward James Olmos, there was a full-on fucking Sith Lord in charge of your fleet, and you were also Sith.
Of course you are.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the aspect was for the planet Ziost, and it was colder than a Sith Lord's stare.
Mm, nice. Yes. And aside from Jesse's campaign idea just then, if you're confused about what Fate actually is, well, that's Fate. Fate is a story game. It's a story game that imagines that everything is a character. Everything can be useful to you. Everything has an impact on what you can do in the game. And invoking these elements of the story uses aspects, and aspects are a part of your character. Like an aspect might be what, Jesse? Like in your Sith game, give an example of a character aspect.
Oh God, I didn't make the characters. Well, I said my aspect is best friend.
hmm Yeah, so you could, if you were playing like a fantasy style Fate game, you could say like what, like inheritor of a family heirloom. You could even do it one better to say like my father's sword,
Yeah,
or
bearer of the sword of blah blah blah, you know.
exactly.
If
So
you were
the
doing, I'm gonna steal this from a Cortex system game, which has a kind of similar whole aspect tag thing. But I think what would really translate well is if you were playing an X-Men game in Fate and
hmm
you were playing Wolverine, you
hmm
might have the aspect best at what I do. Love.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. The whole idea is to take this concept that it could be positive, it could be negative, it could be used either way. It defines who your character is, and you're looking for opportunities to use it. And so you have a certain number of aspects based on the, power level of the character creation process that your GM is running in Fate. And then you come up with like an identifying aspect, like son of prince of a long forgotten empire, or the like on a street level fantasy campaign, like like a hired blade of this of a criminal organization, and then you'd have to come up with that, and then you use different aspects to describe your relationship to the setting and the other character. Like you could say, um the syndicate wants me dead, or something like that, right? Like that becomes an aspect, and you get to use that in the game by using your imagination. The fate system is really cool because it's all about your imagination, and there's just enough of a game in it in order to make it work, in my opinion.
So, like the Syndicate Wants Me Dead example, just to give you, if I was playing a character who had that aspect, and I might be like, I'm going to try and blend into the crowd. And because the syndicate wants me dead, I'm really good at doing this. And
hmm
so I would tag that aspect, spend a fate point, get to introduce a scene, introduce something
Right.
that's blah, blah, blah. Conversely, I could also be like, yeah, it's I'm meeting up with my girlfriend for some much needed downtime, but the syndicate wants me dead. Like,
hmm
so you can actually create complications for yourself. And that's the part that's, I think it takes some getting used to in playing
Yes.
Fate is like, I'm deliberately going to throw wrenches at my own character,
hmm
which can make it harder. I was reading a review of this today. It can make it harder to kind of embody your character,
hmm
like method acting style, the way I think some people might assume role playing is done,
Right.
because you're constantly fucking yourself up to make the story more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and the GM can compel your aspects, and then if they do that and you accept it, they give you a fate point. And fate point is kind of like the powerful currency that helps you accomplish great things in the game. So, with that same aspect of the syndicate wants me dead, in the same example of Jesse's character looking to hide in the crowd, the GM could say, well, you're having a difficult time hiding. The syndicate wants you dead. They're taking the time to thoroughly search through this crowd. That could have been a conversely opposite side of that encounter. Um,
Yep.
so, it's like being very creative. And I think what threw me for a loop with Fate originally, and this is part of like the what you do in the game portion of what we're talking about, is like I got into my own head about how complicated my aspects should be. And I think the game gives a pretty good default set of examples um on aspects, because you make a defining one for yourself, a couple of others, and then you tie some of them to the other player characters or certain things in the game setting. But I first encountered this system through a game that I didn't even get to play called Spirit of the Century. This system, it should be noted, this was the like indie darling before Apocalypse World came in and basically just ate its lunch.
Yeah.
Like this was the story game darling that everybody was talking about. And then like Blades in the Dark just fucking took over. Like Dungeon World destroyed this. Apocalypse World, powered by the apocalypse, basically was just like hold my beer and just took over. And I think that the
Yeah, that was like Fate, 4 dice. This is way too crunchy.
yeah. I think it comes down to communication. Spirit of the Century, I'm trying to remember exactly how that was described to me. There's also the Dresden Files role playing game uses the same system.
I ran a short campaign of that.
Okay, how much does that encompass the Fate core system then?
I mean, the Fate core systems in it, you don't have to have the core book.
Mm-hmm.
It had 2 books, Your Story, Our World, and that had
Mm-hmm.
everything you needed to play in it.
Yeah.
I was still working at Little Shop of Games, rest in peace, Little Shop of Games, uh, when this book came out. So like the Fate products of this time period, I have a whole section on a lower shelf of my gaming shelf because I had a discount because I worked at a game store.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I have a lot. But yeah, Dresden Files was fun, but you don't it has everything from Fate Core in it. You don't need the Fate Core book to run it.
Yeah.
I also have the Atomic Robo RPG for some reason.
I didn't that uses the Fate system, I assume.
hmm I have a really weird one too that's like the graphic novel I never read. A friend got me because he saw a
Mm-hmm.
role-playing game and knew I liked graphic novels. It's like
Mm. So let me ask you this. Does fate matter? Because one of our book review flow points is why it matters. And does fate matter at this point? I mean, it did until the powered by apocalypse system came in. But does fate matter? Did they miss their mark? Is this a dead system or a system for enthusiasts only?
I don't hear about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear people talking about it. I don't see posts about it in gaming Twitter. I don't hear about it on any of the podcasts. I don't think it's a dead system. I'm sure it still has its fans. It's still for sale. I mean, it's $25 for the core book. It's pretty accessible.
You can also
Um,
get the accelerated version and pay what you want on
yeah.
uh on most sites that offer role playing game products.
Uh, so I don't know. I mean, like, it's hard to say. I can't say for certain that there's a conversation between fate and between the powered by the apocalypse. I think that from a certain point, if you look back at 2013
Mm-hmm.
and where story gaming kind of came and went, like this created a pretty solid platform that Apocalypse World could come and build on in
Mm-hmm.
the indie game, story game community. Um, I think there's some sadness in Fate's history because of internet drama and conflict. There was the Google Plus community, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
know. There was a sort of like a very vicious, as I'm old school, I will call it a flame war, a very vicious flame war between some people that were real big into the early OSR scene and also the story gamers about, what is a story game? This isn't even a game. Like Fate's
Mm-hmm.
not even a game. There's no rules and blah blah blah. And it's just one of those things that I guess hindsight being 2020, I find so terribly sad because to me, what's really great about the OSR is that rulings, not rules,
Mm-hmm.
is fiction first gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah, that's kind of where my thought process was going next. But I'm glad you mentioned that because that kind of like crystallizes it into something I can ask you right now, which is, would Fate be good for the OSR? Like, could you mash? You could do an OSR style game in the Fate system, but would it adhere to the things that make the OSR what it is?
I don't think it would. I think you could do the thematic visual, like you could do the painting of the
Mm-hmm.
prog rock album cover, like weirdness in Fate,
Mm-hmm.
but Fate is feels inherently more pulpy
Mm-hmm.
in
Okay.
actual play. It feels way more pulpy than OSR.
Okay.
Um, just because you can tag some like aspects, or you can tag them positively or negatively. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I want to say about mechanically what feels like OSR is that there's a lot of negative. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of negative that you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to survive. Um, it
Yeah.
goes back to the topic we've talked about before, um, player skill versus character skill.
Mm-hmm.
I think to really have a good OSR experience, you need a weird world with a great 90% chance of light showers and body horror.
Yeah.
And and basically you need to lose a little agency to the dice.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be some freaking peril uh to overcome that you don't really have any control over.
Mm-hmm.
Fate, all the peril, you just throw it at yourself.
Yeah.
And then you've got a fifth, you can overcome it like pretty well because
Yeah, I would say Fate requires player skill in a way that most role-playing games don't. I can't speak to the OSR because I don't have a lot of experience with OSR games. I mean, I've been
let's
reading OSR games as a part of season three. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
the player skill for Fate is a very different player skill because it's a
Mm-hmm.
skill at storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a knock on OSR. Everybody who listens to the show, you know I love OSR games. I'm running two Shadow Dark campaigns with people I work with. I play in another one. Like I love OSR gaming, but it's a different set of player skill
Mm-hmm.
to pay attention to the environment and be like to be cautious and wary
Mm-hmm.
and or to just go press all the buttons and see what happens because that's fun. But that's very different from deliberately setting yourself up for failure and complications to make the story more interesting, which is what Fate's all about.
Yeah, I think the player skill part, I think you summed it up perfectly. It comes in player imagination. One of the best examples I heard of, like, how do I know if I'm doing this wrong when it comes to fate? And it's like if you imagine your character to be like a warrior or a fighter, and all you do is say, I swing my sword, you're doing fate wrong. What you should be doing is looking for aspects to invoke in the scene that you're in and use those to your advantage or disadvantage depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So that
Or
same fighter character, if they're in like a wizard sanctum and there's a bookcase in the library, you should be trying to tip that bookcase over on the evil wizard instead of trying to like hack him to pieces, is the way that I read it online. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. I was going to say my example is like you should use your I swing my sword to create an advantage by cutting the string on the chandelier so it crashes
Mm-hmm.
down and creates a fire in the room, you know. And then
Right.
there's another aspect in the scene now. Room's on fire, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that you can either tag or to get more story points to get the fate points for the mechanics, or to let it hinder you, or you can use it to your advantage. I think what well, this is moving into the aha moments. So
Sure.
what do you do? Kind of anything. Like my Battlestar Sith Lactica campaign was an idea I'd been kicking around in my head since Battlestar Galactica was on the reboot, not the original. The reboot was on sci-fi. Um, you know how many Star Wars systems I looked at and started charting out how to do that in, and then never
Mm-hmm.
actually, you know,
Sure.
there was a lot of sitting on the pot, very little shitting,
Yeah.
until Fate came along, and I didn't need a full-on resource book. I was like,
Right.
okay, aspects, this handles it. It is agnostic enough. I can do all the aspects. We can have lightsabers. We can have force powers.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool. There we go.
So how did you do face powers? How did you do force powers in Fate?
They were just extras, like
Okay.
extras you had on your character sheet that were unlockables for different kind of stunts and stuff.
So explain extras for the audience.
They're a thing you have that lets you do stuff with skills that normal people couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's an example in the core rule book. Let me see if I can find it. It was just in the back about like a magic academy.
Mm-hmm.
You have to give up a skill, one of your character starting skill slots to be in that, but once there, you can use this extra. Um, well, yeah, here, okay, here's an example of an extra. Extra media. Choosing the media archetype at character creation gets you this extra. It costs skill ranks and refresh for associated stunts. And then there's a couple actions. You can use it to overcome an obstacle. You can use it to create an advantage. You can use it to attack. You can use it to defend.
Mm-hmm.
So for media to overcome, you can use media to disseminate information to the public with whatever spin you want to put on it. For create an advantage, you can use media to place aspects on an event or an individual, reflecting the reputation they gain from your stories.
Mm-hmm.
Attack, if you have sufficient leverage to psychologically harm someone through a smear campaign or media bullying, use this for attack. And you can use the media to prevent damage to your own reputation. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, that's an extra.
Right. Yeah, and every skill has like a default set of uses, which is what Jesse just listed off. It's like attack, defend, overcome, etc.
Create an
And
advantage.
and you create an advantage and the extras like in the sense of like magic, like a magic system. When this is part of the failings of the Fate Core system because they should have had a just like out of the box magic system using fate. You can find those in one of the supplemental books, but they just overshot their audience, the potential of their audience, in my opinion. So, like for a magic system, you could create an extra and then require it to have a very specific aspect, right? So the aspect could be like speaker in dreams or something like that, like a dark entity or Cthulhu like entity that's granting you magic, and you invoke the aspect to then gain access to using like a magic based skill that's only available by taking this extra. And you get a certain number of extras based on the power level that the GM is designed for the campaign. And then also there's a refresh rate in which you regain your the power system in the game that might also suffer based on how many extras you've taken. But it really does just open it up to be like, well, I know I want this in the game. So instead of like designing a huge like spells per day system around it, I'm just going to make it like you have to connect to your source of magic by invoking your aspect, and then you can use your skill. And then, if you don't use the skill successfully, it disconnects you from the source and you have to spend a fate point to reconnect yourself or whatever like basic, very basic rules the GM wants to set up for their magic system that they want. That's the strength of it. Is like if you can imagine it, you can basically put it into fate. That's the strength. That's why it's cool.
And it's going to be abstract enough, you're not going to have to worry about the crunch and getting it right.
Even though that's the first thing that everybody wants to do with it, myself included. Like
That's the
when,
first thing you and I want to do with it.
yeah, like when Jesse first turned me onto this game, he gave me a physical copy of the book, and I read it on the airplane flight back home. And the first thing I wanted to do was replicate a spells per day crunchy system a la D&D into it, right? And then there was a part of me that kind of felt bad for doing that, but then years later discovered that's basically what everybody wants to do, which speaks back to this other YouTuber. And I'm going to put the link to this guy's video in it because he sums it up perfectly. But like, this is where they screwed up. Like they were like they didn't realize where their audience was coming from, and they didn't speak directly to them. Because if enough people have tried to do this online, including myself in my own experience, then like that's clearly an entry point to the system. And I think that they needed to define a fantasy setting that basically works with enough cohesive elements to tie into what we're used to from D&D, and then just say like here's how you do it in Fate. Here's how you do it in a system where you can basically do anything. You just have to like think about it abstractly and not overcomplicate it.
You know what game I see this being in conversation with, actually more from a design aesthetic, is index card.
Okay, explain.
Like I just feel there's so much of the design of the book and everything is,
Mm-hmm.
and like the way you can just create things on the fly and the reduction to this thing. I feel
Yep.
like index card went the D20 way with it, but it
Right.
comes out 3 years later than this. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like there's no way the creator of index card was not familiar. with Fate and was like, I'm going to take
Interesting.
some of the cool things from Fate and put it back in the D20 system.
Yeah. Okay. I could see that. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think this also has the same sort of the same problem we talked about with Troika, uh, of
Mm-hmm.
the setting being kind of implied and sort of
Mm-hmm.
this one sort of vaguely the setting is vaguely winked at, like what the possible settings could be.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of they're sort of random. Like, here's a mafia thing we're going to talk about for like 3 pages, and here's a modern investigation one for two
Mm-hmm.
pages. And like, there's just too much, and you need something that you know. I feel like to
Mm-hmm.
give you confidence to hang the mechanics on so you can figure out how it works.
Yeah. And I think that I completely agree with you. And the reason why is because the spirit of the century version of this system is a lot easier to wrap your head around, in my
Justin Files
opinion.
is a lot easier to wrap your head around.
Because yeah, exactly. It's giving you a cohesive setting and defined like guardrails and rules to help you navigate through the system.
Well,
Eh,
also too, I think that having that explicit setting, and this might be, this is, yeah, I think this is blanket big statement. Hey, dear listener, if you have a different opinion, please write us at jauntymantis@gmail.com or tweet at us at wantymantis about why I'm wrong about this. But I think this is the problem with any generic or universal system is
Mm-hmm.
that the question that we try to answer in our reviews podcast, what do you do in this game?
Mm-hmm.
Is a question that the mechanics and the experience point system or how you level up character progression and character creation are all working very hard to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And without a setting, it's really almost impossible to answer that question.
Right.
I think that goes true for Fate Core. I think it's true for Fate Accelerated. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
true for GURPS. I've run out of universal or generic systems, having said GURPS. But
Mm-hmm.
like that's like there can be a beautifully designed, brilliant game, and I can read the mechanics till the cows come home. But if I don't know what the player characters are supposed to do or assumed to be doing, those me I don't know the right language to ask the questions the mechanics are going to answer.
Yeah, and Palladium with Rifts is a perfect example of this because Rifts gives
Systems hot
you a
garbage.
framework. No, seriously, the Palladium system is another system you could do anything with, any genre, any setting. You know what I mean? There's rules for everything. That was the intent of the design, right? Like if you go back to our Exploring Rifts episode, that's we covered this briefly, but by putting it in the riffs setting, it is a like bouncing off point or jumping off point, I should say, to go and do whatever these things are. You know,
Yeah,
you
you're
want to
gonna,
go through a rift and do a fantasy riffs like game, you've got it. Like
but
you can
before
make
that,
that
you're
happen.
probably gonna fight demons, mutant dogs, and goddamn Illinois Nazis
Hmm.
because it tells you what to do in the setting.
Right, right. It informs you on how to play the game in the through the setting.
You heard
And
it here first, folks. Johnny Manis hot takes. Riffs is better than Fate.
you know what? I would agree with that. I think Rifts is better than Fate because Rifts stands the test of time.
That's true.
You know, and Rifts have so much more going against it than Fate did. Like Fate really kind of shit the bed. And Rifts was just like a lot, and it's God, the indexing of that system, the way it's written, the layout, you know what I mean? And all these
Last
things get
night,
improved,
last
but
night in game, they tried to buy food for a trip, and I'm like, I have no idea where to find the credit price for that.
yeah.
Like, oh, here's some random like gear. Like, do you want some fishing line? I can tell you how much fishing line is, but like preserved food,
Hmm.
no.
I have looked up both of these systems online and done the same cursory level amount of research, and there's way more available on Rifts than there is on Fate. There's way more things that people have done. And now, granted, Rifts has been out for longer than Fate. So maybe that's the part that stood the test of time. But I feel like people lovingly appreciate Rifts, and Fate is like the game where people are like, this is my favorite game, but nobody will play it, you
Yeah,
know?
this is it's really curious because I had My first game of Fate I played was actually at the game store.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, this guy named David, he ran a Fate game. He had props. It was cool. It was like a noir detective sort of pulp adventure. I was a boxer, I
Mm-hmm.
think. It was fun. We had a blast. I was like, this system's great because I knew what to do with it, having looked
Mm-hmm.
at the book before I didn't. Um, but I think one of the things that we said, the test of time in this niche of story games, Fate had probably sole big name indie story game dominance for like 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
3 years, maybe. And then along came Apocalypse World and powered by the Apocalypse games. And it's not like Fate was protected by some license. You can't make shit in Fate or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's pretty accessible, but the explosion of Apocalypse World, like, or powered by the Apocalypse games, and then, Forged in the Dark games, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is like it's a successor.
It is. They're made by the same company. They're both made by Evil Hat.
Um, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting relic from a time when, like, I think story gaming first got potentially almost mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I I've read the Fate Core book a couple of times. I'm absolutely in love with it. Please don't take this episode of me, saying these hard truths, or at least they're truths to me, or these hard criticisms, I should say, about the game. I love it. Like, if I'm running a game in the future, I'm going to be tempted to put it in the Fate Core system because I'm a story gamer first and foremost. I don't give a shit about D&D's 5e's subclasses and feats and spells and shit. I don't care. Like it doesn't matter to me. Like I'm just going to try to play an interesting character and I'm going to be like fighter and I'm going to have to choose a subclass. It'll probably be something from Baldur's Gate 3. You know what I mean? Like just I don't care. Like I don't have the extra books outside of Spelljammer. Uh but like Fate Core, I read this book and I just get like so many ideas to do things. I'm like, oh, that'd be so easy to do. You just do an aspect on this and then blah 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 blah, and it starts this like flow chart of thoughts, and it's just appeals to me so much more.
I think,
Like go ahead.
sorry for interrupting. We can't talk about Fate because I know Mark is going to listen to this episode. Howdy, Mark. How's it going? You beautiful, beautiful man beast. Uh, my aha moment for Fate after playing it and running a campaign was Mindjammer,
Mm,
which is this ridiculously giant book, like huge. I found it at the discount rack at my childhood friendly local game store. And it was discounted down to like $40, but just, I mean, like 600-page book about this transhuman future. And the thing they just kept saying is like everything's a character.
mm-hmm.
Everything's a character. This
Yep.
planet is a character. And what makes it a character? It has aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Here they are. You could control another planet and engage in planetary level play by controlling the polity of this whole planet going against this other planet.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's weird that the Apocalypse World games just kind of showed up and entirely dominated this
Mm-hmm.
space in the story game market.
Yep. Yep. It's amazing how Blades in the Dark is Evil Hat's powered by the Apocalypse system, and Evil Hat is the company that brought us Fate Core.
Hmm.
And it's just like even they knew that they're like, well, this is the thing we have to go for because this is what's selling or this is what people are interested in. And Fate's just kind of this like island of misfit toys role playing game that like I swear to God it's a great game, but am I going to be able to convince my group to play it? And once we start playing it, how many times are people going to raise their hand and be like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't get it, and they'd be like, oh, that's fair. Let's try it again. I do want to ask you specifically, I just thought of this. So at the time we're recording this, the Mortal Engines bonus episode has just aired. So I want to ask because we had talked about what system would be best, or what's a system we would use for a Mortal Engines role playing game, and you had very, accurately pointed out using the Cipher system, but you could use the Fate Core system for the
Yeah.
Mortal Engines role playing game and use it very well, and might even be easier than in the Cipher system with everything being a character, right? The
Yeah, the
rolling
cities
death
having
machine
the cities
cities.
having
Yeah.
aspects like
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. So just food for thought right there.
yeah, that food is another city
Yeah.
and you know.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, what do you feel what are your personal feelings before we wrap up? What are your personal feelings when it comes to Fate?
Um I think that Fate is a great story game that lets you do pulpy stories irregardless of setting. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's so wide open, it requires more work on the part of GMs
Mm-hmm.
than and players
Mm-hmm.
than the Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark games, which are absolute fucking bangers at doing genre fiction in whatever genre they're aimed at emulating.
Yeah.
I don't think Fate does that.
Yeah.
I think Fate has a broader target. Fate is sort of intended to be beyond genre. The mechanics aren't genre in Fate. The
Mm-hmm.
mechanics are the way you engage with conflict and consequence for your character. What those are might be informed by the genre, but that doesn't really matter to the way you roll dice in this game.
Yes.
And I think there's probably a desire to emulate the genres of stories we like to read or watch. And so when you have mechanics that let you emulate those story beats, and it feels like that genre of story, the way Apocalypse was, I think that's probably why Fate's lunch got eaten.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with
But
that.
that doesn't mean you should throw this out. I mean, obviously, I still have my physical core book
Mm-hmm.
right here and all my other, I also never get rid of gaming books. So,
Why would you?
I mean, I have, like, this is actually my fourth collection. But
I love Fate. I think there's a lot of wannabe writers out there in the game master seat, and I don't understand why Fate isn't picked up more by game masters who want to write that novel. Like Fate just seems like that system. Like it just seems like it's perfect for you. And maybe it's because we can't convince our players to give it a healthy shot. You know what I mean? Maybe they just would rather play 5e Dungeons and Dragons and that's it. You know what I mean? I'm not sure, but I love this system. I'm dreaming of a day when Fate makes a surging comeback, like it's been lost to the annals of history, and then one day just shows up again, and people are like, "Why did it? This game's awesome!" Like
you think they could do it without making a second edition?
I think they have to do it without making a second edition. I think if they
Mhm.
make a second edition, like what would you change? You know what I mean? Like they've already made a condensed version, Fate Accelerated, and I mean, listener, if you know better than I do, jauntymantis@gmail.com. I look at Fate Accelerated and I'm like, sure, this is an easier read, but it doesn't make the game, it doesn't impress the game upon an audience of gamers any better, in my opinion. You know, like maybe it's better written and it's more refined in its communication, but communication was the game's first and foremost worst problem. So
Fair.
if Fate Accelerated didn't solve that, I doubt a second edition will. There is a book on Drive Through RPG that somebody independently wrote about running a Fate game, and maybe I'll throw that in the notes if I can find it again. But I want to read that book because the comments or reviews online of that book are like, "This is how you understand how to play Fate, is read this guy's book." And I was like, I got to read a book about a gaming book that I need to read in order to help understand the game. So
You have to read a
we'll
book
see.
about a thing you like and are interested in. Oh God.
No, I only read web pages and TikTok videos,
Oh,
Jesse.
okay. I got to look it up. Hit pause on the recording for me.
Okay.
And that's why I'm done with the show. This was an ambush and out and out. Oh, and you hit record. Great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You've been disinvited. This is the final episode of the Jaunty Mantis.
We were never even friends. Okay. I found the fate book I was looking for.
Okay.
And it turns out it wasn't a fate book. It's got
Perfect.
a D20 conflict resolution, but apparently I own the Underground, the Sam and Fuzzy role playing game.
Oh, cool. And it's
I
got
don't.
nothing to do with fate.
Yeah, nope. I was just wrong in my head. It was fate, and it's not.
Perfect. Well, listen, everybody, we had a lot of fun tonight talking about fate. And if you're still thoroughly confused about what fate is and how to play it, you're welcome.
Hey, what are we talking about next week?
Next week, we will be briefly discussing on our new next episode, season 3 continues our book reviews. We will be doing an in-depth dive of Ultraviolet Grasslands.
Getting back to weird books full of tables. Matt's gonna hate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear them.
Yeah.
Just
And
like our listeners can't. And if you can wait to hear his thoughts, write us about it.
JauntyMantis@gmail.com.
Wanty Mantis on the site formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, and if you like the show, if you've been enjoying what you've been listening to, apparently 250 something monthly ear holes get filled, pairs of ear holes. I'm trying to be clever. It's not
Let's
working.
not say ear holes get filled again on air as a
Yeah.
thing.
Okay, 250 something subscribers, listeners to the Jaunty Mantis, according to our internal statistics, like this show enough to keep listening to it. So what we would ask of you is, if you want to, go to your podcatcher, podcaster service, wherever you found this show, and leave it whatever the equivalent of a 5-star review is.
If you want to feel like you're in a parasocial relationship
Mm-hmm.
with us and that we're special to you,
Yeah.
wouldn't it just be better if more people knew about it, but didn't
Yeah.
have that same really in-depth relationship you have with us?
Yeah.
So
You know
tell them
how
about it by leaving us a review. 5 stars, please.
That's right. When you did you ever have that friend who was like, "Oh, I know about this awesome restaurant, and like I'm not going to tell anybody about it because I don't want them to get so busy because I just want to be able to sit down and eat like whenever I want." It's like you do realize they're running a business, right? Like they could really use the help.
That's like everyone who lives in Seattle.
Oh, perfect. Well, I've never
Yeah.
lived in Seattle, so I have no idea.
Yeah, no, no. Mike told me once, like, no, we straight tell people the weather's terrible, so people don't move here.
Well, all I know is that I like visiting Seattle. I like Roscoe's Pizza in Seattle. It's very, very good. And, the people are very nice.
Cool.
Okay. Well, if you're very nice, give us a holler at jauntymantis@gmail.com and the other things Jesse mentioned. And until then, get out there and play some fucking role-playing games.
Yeah,
Right.
roll some fucking fudge dice or some shit.
Yeah, invoke an aspect if you can figure out what that is.